Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Geostrategy in the Grassroots panel discussion entitled Geostrategic Challenges Facing the U.S. and Japan 2022 Plus. I am Mike Turner, President of the Japan Society of New Orleans. This discussion is made possible through a grant we received from the Sasakawa Peace Foundation through the National Association of Japan America Societies and the efforts by the Board of Directors of the Japan Society of New Orleans. Thank you for the faith and trust that you put in Japan Society of New Orleans to host this event. Our online presentation has enabled the participation of an international audience, including a significant participation from Japan. For our Japanese audience, Mazushi, Nihonjin ni gomenasai, konbanwa, honjitsu wa, minasan go sanka, itadakimashite, arigatou gozaimasu. We learned today of another bad earthquake overnight in the northern region of Japan. We hope that our friends and family of our Japanese friends are safe and well. During tonight's talk, if you would like to ask a question of our panelists, please type your question or comment in the comments section while you're viewing this event. Thank you to Dr. Samantha Perez for getting the word out to her students at Southeastern Louisiana University. We're glad to have you online tonight. I have the honor and the privilege to introduce our moderator tonight, Mr. Peter Kelley, President of the National Association of Japan America Societies. As Boston Irish, this is a busy time for Peter as St. Patrick's Day is tomorrow, so salute to him. I've known Peter for over 10 years, and it was over dinner with him in 2011 that led to the revitalization of Japan Society in New Orleans after our Hurricane Katrina experience. Through his guidance and mentoring, Japan Society of New Orleans has strengthened its relationship with its sister city, Matsue City, Shimane, with multiple visits and exchanges. Japan Society of New Orleans participated in the Tomodachi Exchange Program and through our own fundraising efforts, sent an exchange of young professionals to Matsue in 2019. We're currently raising funds to support an exchange with Matsue in 2024 to celebrate our 30th anniversary of our sister city relationship. I'd like to publicly recognize Peter for his outstanding leadership. Japan Society is very grateful to have you as a friend and mentor. So without further ado, over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Mike. And I too remember 10 years ago having dinner with you at Tommy's in New Orleans, and what a pleasure that was, and how nice it has been to see all of the work that you and the folks in the Japan Society of New Orleans have done to restart the relationship with Matsue and establish the Japan Society's programs in New Orleans. I am president of the National Association of Japan America Societies. We're located in Washington, D.C. There are 38 Japan America Societies located all around the country, and all of them are private, not-for-profit entities which you work in there to establish and to deepen the relationship between Japanese and Americans in the local area. The Japan America Society Network is the largest private association supporting a U.S. bilateral relationship of any kind. And we are pleased at the National Association of Japan America Societies to support that network. The Japan Society in New Orleans is one of our older members. The oldest of our members was founded in 1904 in Boston. And the newest member is from the state of Iowa, starting in 2015. So it's a nationwide network. Our work at National Association of Japan America Societies is to provide our Japan America Society members with quality Japan-related programs, which they might not be able to organize on their own. We offer 6 different program series, each with a different funder, covering public affairs, geostrategy, security, culture, and 2 business programs. They're all competitively offered. So again, congratulations to the Japan Society of New Orleans for winning this grant. Tonight's is the Geostrategy in the Grassroots program. Our funder is the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan. The idea here is to bring the kind of discussions relating to geostrategy, which happen frequently in Washington, D.C. and Tokyo, out to other parts of the United States where this kind of discussion isn't so often heard. What we do in each of these events is we ask an expert from Japan and an expert from the United States to each talk about the geostrategic challenges that Japan and the United States face in Asia from a Japanese point of view and from a U.S. point of view. We're the elegance and the magic of these programs is the speakers, and we're delighted to have two very qualified speakers join us tonight. Our speakers are Dr. Jennifer Lind, who is Associate Professor of Government at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. And from Japan, Ryo Sahashi, who is Associate Professor of the Institute of Advanced Studies at the University of Tokyo. Dr. Sahashi and Dr. Lind have worked together often, so it's a pleasure. I'm sure they are happy to welcome each other, as happy as we are to welcome them. The format for tonight will be to have two talks, one first from Dr. Sahashi for about 15 minutes, and then from Dr. Lind also for about 15 minutes. I'll ask a few questions after that, and then we hope that the audience, including those students at Southeastern Louisiana University, have some questions for you that you'd like to ask. Please do that by putting those questions in the chat, and those will be funneled here, and we will read them out. So with that as an introduction, again, our gratitude goes to our sponsor for this series, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan, which is one of Japan's largest private foundations and has a keen interest in the geostrategic challenges facing Japan. Thank you to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and thank you to our those of you who are joining us from Japan. Let's lead off with Dr. Sahashi. Ryo?
Yes, thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much, everybody of Japan Society New Orleans and Sasakawa Peace Foundation to make it happen. And good evening and good morning from Japan, my friends and colleagues in New Orleans. My name is Ryo Sahashi, working for University of Tokyo. I've been to New Orleans a few times, so I really wanted to come to your place this time, but because of COVID, I'm now talking from Tokyo, my home. So this is very unfortunately, but sadly, but this is a very important moment for us to talk about geostrategic challenges. I'm going to talk about rising China, but of course, we have to think about Ukraine. So this is a moment we have to think, what is the challenge we have in international politics? And what is the meaning of partnership and alliance, in coming decades? The good thing for us is Japan and United States are really in good alliance last 70 years. So I think this is very important for us to think more about geostrategic challenges facing us. So I want to open my slide. Thank you very much. So please go to the next slide. So we are now, having two confrontation. One is power confrontation between United States and China, but the other is more serious and happening now by military force. This is Russia's invasion to Ukraine. This is very good example of aggression by using military force and breaching international laws. So what will become the international order in the future? Next slide, please. I think, this is the age of distrust. Of course, we have a distrust between Russia and Ukraine, but not only that, we also have distrust between Russia and Europe, Russia and the United States, and also between US and China. And all of the distrust are very deep-rooted and based on facts and fear. So I think, last 30 years, we had age of globalization. And we try to believe cooperation is the driving force of this world towards a better future. Cooperation was a kind of buzzword or keyword, even though we didn't know. In many cases, cooperation have a lot of barriers or, stumbling blocks, like national sovereignty or national interest sometimes prevents each country from working together. But still, we try to keep hope. But Putin's aggression to Ukraine and Chinese behavior today in Asia and in the world start to show, we have to think again to whether they are really trustworthy or not. Next slide, please. Coming back to 30 years ago, we had the end of the Cold War. And at the end of the Cold War, we had dreams. And we had, and that dreams have some basic premises. First one is US hegemony will keep going on. But the secondary, supranational integration process will happen in Europe. And Chinese and Russian support to the West-led post-war international order. And technology solve many problems. And we would have more transnational cooperation and activities, including corporate activities. And all of them are contributing to the better world. They are our basic premises. You might not believe, we had these, dreams 30 years ago. I think tonight we have many students, so I'm very happy to hear your voice. But we, the older generation, had these kind of dreams, back to 1990s or even 2000s, 20 years ago. But all of these premises are now in crisis or challenges. Looking back like 2007 and 8, actually, Vladimir Putin made a big speech in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. And what he said is really, big criticism against United States and against the West. He started to show his own distrust against the West. And also China started to be very emboldened and overconfident in herself from 2008, seeing the US-led global financial crisis. And then around 2014 and 15, both Russia and China started to make their own behaviors breaching international law to some extent. No, to many extent. Like Russia annexed Peninsula Crimea by force. And also China started to make artificial island in South China Sea, even though these islands are in dispute with neighboring countries. And now, by the invasion by Russia to Ukraine, the order itself is now finally collapsing. But I said this is unfinished job of creating order from the end of the Cold War. We had dreams. It was like a daydream. But I want to say it was unfinished things. We did believe we had order, but actually the order was not there. Russia and China never accepted order as it is. And now they are going to away from the order. This is a problem. Next slide, please. like Japan is realizing this fact very well. So like Japan recently made a big step toward the Ukraine. You know, Japan is really slow country, very slow in everything. But it was my big surprise. The government of my country suddenly decided to provide humanitarian aid and also some defensive equipment, including body armor to Ukrainian people and Ukrainian military. I didn't think so. I didn't think, you know, they could make it happen so speedy, but they did it. So this is a really good example. Like Japan, as well as G7 country, is now taking this invasion and aggression very seriously as the breach or breaching the international law. And if we don't do anything, or if we don't do sufficient support to Ukraine, this will become the really big failure of international order. So we couldn't stop the next step by divisionist. So I think this is now a very critical moment. And the coalition building and partnership among the countries and people who really love universal values, international society, and principle are really heightened. Next slide, please. But at the same time, I really want to remind you, now everybody look at Russia's activities, Russia's aggression to Ukraine. But China's rise still posing one of the gravest geopolitical threats to the United States, Japan, and the rest of the world. China, not Russia, has the potential to change the global balance of power in terms of military power, in terms of economic power, and in terms of scientific and technological power and political influence. Moreover, we still look at the chance of military conflict over Taiwan Strait. I don't think Russia's invasion to Ukraine hastened Chinese invasion to Taiwan. I don't think so. I mean, this invasion hastened the Chinese behavior over Taiwan. But still, we have to look at Taiwan and Chinese other military activities very seriously. And what I'm worrying now is the attention of United States, Japan, and other major countries going to Russia, and strategic advantage China has gained. And the arrival of a China-centric world is coming more than we expected. So this is the things, you know, I'm now worrying about. We have to look at the challenges from China more clearly. Next slide, please. We did think last 40 years, when we normalize our relationship with China, we can shape China. So that's the reason we engage with Chinese Communist Party. But now reality is totally different. China, as well as Russia, is shaping us, or shaping and changing and challenging liberal democratic order in the world. So we have to look at that very clearly. Next slide, please. You know, Chinese growth is more than we expected. This is just a very, you know, rough calculation of GDP. You know, so US GDP and China GDP is shown here. And China GDP is Chinese GDP, gross domestic production is now 70% of United States GDP. Next slide, please. And according to a national security strategy of the Biden administration, China is the only competitor to the United States with a multifaceted multifaceted power, not only economic power, but also military power and technological power. I think a next national security strategy might be included also Russia with a stronger language, but still China should be one of the most important competitor for the United States. Because next slide, please. Because China, again, has the potential to change the international order by its own economic support, assistance to third world, and also they totally breach the international humanitarian laws and human rights within their territory. Look at Uyghur, Xinjiang Uyghur, look at Hong Kong, look at Tibet. We have a lot of issue concerning of Chinese government policy over minority people. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. And also, we have big worries about Taiwan. Taiwan is democratized, even though China insists Taiwan is part of China, and both Japan and the United States acknowledge or understand a Chinese position over Taiwan. But we also want to have peaceful resolution between mainland China and Taiwan. But tension is now rising over Taiwan Strait. This is a frustration Xi Jinping has over Taiwan. He wants to get back to Taiwan, but he cannot do it. So more and more pressure Xi Jinping is now making last 3 years. Not only economic pressure, but also military pressure over 23 million Taiwanese people. So this is a thing we have to take care by our moral principle, say, but also, next slide, please. Also, by economic reason, we heavily depend on Taiwan economically. I think some of you is now looking at this live motion by your smartphone or iPad or any kind of tablet. But within your device, you have many semiconductor. Most advanced semiconductor are now made in Taiwan, to your surprise. One of the most advanced categories of semiconductor within a 10 nanometer, over 90% is made in China. So this is a fact. We have to hope the stability and peace over Taiwan Strait. But Xi Jinping regime in China is now challenging, even using military threat over Taiwan. So this is what we really have to take care. And next slide, please. So this is the end of my slide, but I really want to emphasize this point. Japan and the United States are really good partner in navigating this age of distrust and age of geostrategic challenges. Now we have Prime Minister Kishida and you have President Joe Biden. But we are really having a good conversation over how we can enhance our alliance network, alliance mechanism. And we both now try to, renew the platform of our security policy. On Japan side, we are now trying to have more economic security mechanism. This is, how can we protect our technology and economy from China and Russia and other revisionist countries. But to make it happen, actually, we really need to work together toward economic security, toward less depending on China, Russia, and other revisionistic countries. Democracy have to work together. We have to work together to have renewed supply chain network, to have better technological cooperation, and to have better negotiation over the future rule making in the world. So I think now we are now going into the moment of alliance. I mean, the value of alliance is really heightened. So I really believe Japan and the United States are really true friends and tomodachi in coming decade. We have to work together. So thank you very much for listening. And I really want to hear your question and comments.
Dr. Sahashi, that's a very thoughtful perspective, particularly the idea of a transition from an age of cooperation to an age of distrust, and your question of who is exactly shaping whom. The United States and Japan and others thought that cooperation might shape China, but in fact, the shaping may be going in the other direction. To listen, let's now invite Dr. Jennifer Lin to give her perspective, and then we'll start listening to we'll start collecting the questions. I hope that as you hear these presentations, you'll be thinking of the questions that you'd like to hear both of these speakers address. Jennifer?
Thank you, Peter, and Sahashi-san, thank you so much for your thoughtful remarks. I'm thrilled to be with all of you tonight. I'm very grateful to the various organizations that have brought us all together, to the Japan Society of New Orleans, and also to Sasakawa. I have wonderful memories of working at the Sasakawa offices in Tokyo, and so I owe them a great deal. So thank you so much. Arigatou gozaimasu. Ryo talked about many geostrategic challenges that the United States and Japan are facing. And it's a dangerous, upsetting world that we're looking at right now, gotten much more dangerous just in the last month. And it's been deeply upsetting for everyone to watch the return of war to Europe. And as Ryo was saying, to wonder if it means the return of war to Asia as well. So we're in a really unsettling time. And a big question going forward for our allies, for the US-Japan relationship, is how are we going to meet those challenges, these growing threats that the alliance faces, both to territory of Japan and Asia, and to our shared values and interests in Asia and around the world. So I'd like to talk tonight about the alliance's capabilities and how the alliance is going to meet those challenges. There's a long-standing debate about Japan's own, call it remilitarization, or when will Japan become, quote, a normal country, is the way many people talk about it. The big question is, do we expect Japan to play a larger geopolitical role than it has been since the end of World War II? Obviously, Japan, for the past 7 or so years, has played a very restrained role in terms of its national security policy. And so there's a long-standing debate about when might that change. And that debate has been reinvigorated by recent events. I think Sahashi-san mentioned there's been surprise at the strong reaction by Japan on the side of the United States and other countries opposing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We see rising military budgets in Japan, even discussion in the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, about perhaps should Japan be spending 2% of its gross domestic product, its GDP, on defense. And we're hearing, as I say, a lot of discussion about Japan's changing role. So tonight I wanted to make 3 points to kind of help make sense of the debate so far and the debate going forward, because we are going to continue hearing a great deal about this. So one question is, well, what might need to change? What's the current situation? Why would we need to change anything? And so here I would say that Japan's had a remarkably restrained and over time we certainly see changes, but it's still exhibited strong restraint since the 1950s, basically. I think that is going to need to change. It's already changing. And again, we'll talk about China's rise and the influence that's had, but it's going to need to change more. The way to think about this is Japan is really extraordinarily restrained for a country of its size and wealth. Japan has all the requisite attributes of a great power. It has a large population, over 130 million people. It has the world's third largest economy. It has a very high income economy, one of the richest countries in terms of per capita GDP. And it's one of the most innovative, technologically advanced countries in the world. So normally, when you see a country with a profile like that, the country says, I can be a big shot in my international system, and they go about arming themselves with lots of weaponry and trying to have a great deal of influence, often with military statecraft. Japan hasn't done that. One of the really interesting cases we've seen of a country that grew to be what we call a latent power without wanting to translate that into becoming a great military power. So this is something that's quite unusual in international politics, and probably, even though we would say 70 years is quite a long time, probably is not sustainable in international politics. So point number one, what needs to change? Japan is going to need to change in response to the geopolitical challenges it faces. Now, my second point is, what do we think of changes so far? Changes in Japan so far that we've heard recently, and also things that are being spoken about today. And lots of times you'll see a story in the news where they talk about some big change in Japan. For example, they're willing to sell weapons for the first time to its partners, even though there used to be a law that prohibited arms exports. Or purchase of some weapon system that previously Japan wasn't able to purchase because of a law or some sort of norm against that. So sometimes you'll hear in the news some sort of story about Japan. It's raising its military spending. This is unprecedented. You'll see headlines like Japan's flexing its military muscles. So you'll see all of that. But then at the same time, you hear leaders in Washington, D.C. saying, Japan needs to do more. We need Japan to do more. So how do we reconcile those two things? So the answer is that we can and should evaluate changes in Japanese defense against two different benchmarks. So the first benchmark is Japan compared to itself over time. And the second is Japan compared to other countries in the world. And if you like, you can say other great powers. So for the first one, for Japan compared to itself, any news is probably going to be really surprising, maybe unprecedented since the past 70 years, a really big deal. Japan hands like Ryo and I will get all excited and say, wow, Japan's never done this, and this is a really big deal, and I can't believe this is happening, and this certainly isn't the way it was like 30 years ago, and that kind of thing. And it is a big deal, right? It is a big deal. It's new, it's interesting, and it does tell us something about changing norms and attitudes in Japan. At the same time, any given change in Japanese policy or capabilities also needs to be evaluated against that other benchmark of what's kind of normal great power behavior. So something that Japan does or buys, or something that might get Ryo and Peter and I really excited, because we know the history and we see this fascinating evolution at work. That still might be the case, but that change might not actually be a particularly meaningful one in terms of the actual raw capabilities that it might be adding to Japan and to the US-Japan alliance. So the 2% of defense debate is a perfect example. I mean, to anybody who studies Japan, this is just a revolutionary idea, right? That Japan, because we're talking about probably doubling Japan's defense budget, because Japan has had this longstanding norm about spending 1% or less of its GDP on defense. So again, the Japan hands get very excited about the notion of going to 2%. But another important benchmark is the global average of defense spending is 2.4%. So that's everywhere, the average. Japan is a really wealthy country, and it lives next door to a superpower that wants to take some of its territory. So that's another important benchmark, and that benchmark tells us 2% might not be enough. So again, these are the important different ways to look at these proposed changes in Japanese defense. So for my third and last point, I want to say something about a different kind of benchmark. Another way of thinking about how to respond, how the alliance should respond, how Japan should respond to this more threatening geostrategic environment that Ryo was so nicely detailing for us. So another benchmark is China, is the threat from China. To understand any debates about burden sharing in the alliance in the future, we first need to understand a lot more about more than what we typically hear talked about in these kinds of debates. In DC and in meetings that I go to, people just sort of head right to Japan, you need to spend 2% at least, Japan, you need to spend more, you need to do more. But we need to get beyond that. We need to ask ourselves several questions. So first of all, we need to say, okay, well, what are our goals as an alliance? What do we want to be able to do or to prevent China as a regional superpower from being able to do in Asia? And then a second question would be, what tools are we planning on using to try and achieve our goals? Those tools may be a wide range of tools. They could be financial, they could be economic, they could be political, diplomatic, they could be technological. And in every one of those categories, Japan is an extremely influential world-leading country. So again, that's a partner who is very well positioned to help the alliance with solving many of the problems it might want to solve, which has many, many tools in its toolkit that it can bring to bear. Now, if we do identify that there are military missions that we feel the alliance has to be able to perform and that we need to prepare for, then we have to talk about, again, before we start talking about just spending more money, we need to ask ourselves, okay, well, what's the mission? Can the alliance do this mission now, right? And if not, what capabilities does the alliance need to be able to perform it? And then, of course, the question we finally get to is, well, who's planning on performing this mission? What grouping of what forces and so on of the two countries? And what capabilities are both sides bringing to it? And so that, and only at that point, can we start talking about burden sharing. So given that China has engaged in such a significant military buildup in East Asia, and given that it does seem to have a growing assertiveness and a disturbing tendency to rely on the threat of military force in order to change the status quo in the region. Given that, it really does seem as if the alliance needs to start to react more vigorously than we have been to the growing threat from China. And so these conversations within the alliance are going to be challenging ones to have going forward. But let me end on a good note. And I'll echo what Ryo just told us, which is I can't think of allies that are better positioned to have tough conversations with one another. We have been cooperating together for over 70 years. We have been training together. We have been sending business people and students and tourists and everyone back and forth for all that time. We have these wonderful societies like you folks, the Japan Society, that engage the other people in the other country, that create relationships. And so we have so much beyond just this narrow military alliance, which is actually the relationship that we started off with at the end of World War II. But we've grown so far past that. And so I'm pretty optimistic, given this long history of working together and given how much we really value each other and how much we value this partnership. I'm pretty optimistic that together we can figure out a way to meet the challenges that we face. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's the concept of what you referred to as a latent power is an interesting one. We have some questions coming in on the chat so thank you all. Before we get to them, let me just ask each of the speakers one question. We've seen both of our speakers have agreed that this is a time when, in some ways, the purposes and the methods of the alliance need to be rethought, and need to be rethought in relation to China. Ryo, you ended on your last slide. You spoke about Japan. Instead of seeking advantages in negotiations in relation to either China or the United States, for example, you referred to Japan needing to think about how to protect its national interests, and you listed several elements, including economic security, CTPPP, and things like that. Could you explain a little bit more what you had in mind by Japan thinking about protecting its national interest, including economic security?
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Jennifer, for your excellent remarks. And yes, this is a very important moment of alliance, and I think we are in a very good tune. So for me, the very important thing is, first of all, economic security. And that also includes the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which United States somehow don't join at this moment. But at the same time, we still have many things we can do together, even without TPP. So, like the Joe Biden administration is now calling Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which should be very important for Japan and other countries to join and think together. How could we shape international economic order in the Pacific, in the world? Also, like last year, our Prime Minister, Suga, and Joe Biden had a really good summit meeting in April. And when we look at the joint statement and other documents from the summit meeting last April, both governments promised many things on economic security and also scientific projects. This is the way we have to go. Not only traditional national security item, but also we have to go together toward economic security and research and development. But at the same time, just response to Jennifer's point, I believe we have to increase our defense budget. Last year, including our supplementary budget, our defense budget is now 1.1% of our GDP. But our calculation system is slightly different from NATO standard. So if we use the NATO standard, maybe the ratio should be 1.3 or something. But still, we are far below than 2% target NATO countries has. And Germany is now trying to have 2% target. I think, it is, of course, very difficult for us to increase very rapidly at this moment. But I think we have a very good view and support from our voters to increase our defense budget. So I think we can go together towards a better defense in coming decade.
Thank you. And Jennifer, a thought from you, as you say, you mentioned the concept of a latent power. Many people argue that Europe is full of latent powers, but part of the reason that that can work is the NATO alliance and the European Union. Japan as a latent power, is Japan alone in Asia as a latent power? And what effect does that have on Japan's ability to be successful as a latent power?
It's probably I'm just inflicting on you. I'm writing a book on how countries rise to great power, and I'm just inflicting all my terminology on you. So I'll try to restrain myself and not get too wonky.
Sure.
But the key difference is I think it's a useful way to think about it, because many times you might have a country that's quite small in terms of population. Maybe their economy is quite small. Maybe their technology is not very good, and so on. And so such a country wouldn't have an option of being in the category of, being able to take on a great power like China, for example. Alternatively, you might have a country that does have all that kind of raw material, people, wealth, technology, and so on. But again, this really doesn't happen in international politics, except for basically Japan after World War II and Germany after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So those are countries that were among the most powerful in the world in terms of their latent capability, but they chose to have tremendous military restraint. And Germany has been an interesting evolution to watch, where we've seen within NATO, Germany adopting more assertive roles. Like, it was a really big deal. I'm sure you probably remember when in the Balkans, for example, German pilots started flying sorties and this sort of thing. It's like, wow, this has never happened. And so we've seen that evolution. And then what we've seen lately with Germany's promises to increase its defense spending, we're seeing another stage perhaps in that evolution. And then Japan, though, has been slower to evolve past that restraint that it exhibited. But the important point to make, I guess, number one, I would say, this is a choice of Japan. It's not for any sort of lack of capability, and so it's a choice. And even countries that are very responsible global citizens, right? Like Germany, like France, like Sweden, for example, they have robust militaries, and they devote more to their militaries than does Japan. So I think that will need to change. The other thing to point out, though, is if people ever say like, oh, Japan, is really weak, or Japan, people talk about like, oh, Japan collapsed after the bubble economy collapsed. I say, what are you talking about? Japan's the third largest economy in the world. It's one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. Japan is everything but a great military power. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And its allies certainly knows this, but other people need to know it as well.
Thank you. And Japan is a military power. self-defense forces is the name, but Japan's military capabilities themselves are quite well developed.
It has very good technology. Yeah, absolutely. It's been training with the United States. It's got very advanced capabilities. But in terms of, again, we have to ask, well, how much does it need? And there, I don't think I've ever really heard a good answer. And NATO has this 2% benchmark, but there's no reason why that should be the right benchmark for the U.S.-Japan alliance, right? That's just something borrowed from NATO. So we need to figure out better ways of talking about the contributions to the alliance.
Sure. Okay. And questions from the audience. EB asked a question, and I think in part, Ryo, you answered this question, but his question was, or her question was, since the TPP was supposed to take allies further away from China, do you think we might see a revival of U.S. participation, or is the political will still missing? And that's probably one, actually, from the political will still missing. Maybe Jennifer, you want to take that one too. But I think Ryo, you mentioned the movements towards something called the Indo-Pacific Economic Security, which may be relevant to that question. Jennifer, do you want to go first about the political will in for TPP or for trade in general?
Yeah, I'm really glad that the questioner asked this, because I actually meant to raise this in my remarks when I was talking about the need for Japan to kind of grow more assertive and develop more capability in the alliance. A big reason for this is not just the rise of China, but it's also changes in the United States, which is the United States, of course, is a great military power. But we've also seen in recent years a lot of political polarization in the U.S. that I know has really roiled Japan. They've been talking about, can we count on the United States, given the experience of the past 5 or 6 years or so. And then since then, basically, the United States is in a remarkable position where we used to have this really strong bipartisan approach toward foreign policy, and we don't have a bipartisan approach toward anything anymore. And so it's completely understandable if our allies are asking, like, could the United States actually agree to fight for us on our behalf? And so I think the political will is a really important dimension to talk about these days.
Mm-hmm. And Joe, do you think that the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum and all that will that complement TPP or CPTPP, or will it replace it? Any thoughts on that?
I think IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, cannot be a good substitute for TPP. It could make some bridge, or it could help you to buy some time before coming back to TPP. But I think the better and the best answer is to coming back to TPP in terms of rule making. Of course, we still don't know what will be Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Sure. Even Commerce Department don't specify the substance itself. But I think we strongly believe, TPP is still the best. And of course, we need to update to some extent the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But still, that is the best way to come back to Trans-Pacific Partnership. Of course, we know the political deadlock situation in Washington and Capitol Hill. But we made a big efforts last decade. So I think to come back is always the best answer.
Sure. And Japan has carried on that effort in relation to the Trans-Pacific Partnership after the United States withdrew. Yeah. We have a question that I think would warm the hearts of any geostrategist from MJ Yaguchi, who says, Do you believe that the practice of ambiguity about U.S. and NATO supreme national interest promotes miscalculation about U.S. political red lines, perhaps a deference to Russia's calculated risk, and also adds the same question about the PRC's island building in the South China Sea? In other words, the practice of ambiguity about U.S. and NATO supreme national interest, does that create potential miscalculations on the part of Russia? I guess we understand that, and China. Anybody? Jennifer, you want to take that one?
So if the question is it that the U.S. is being unclear what it will fight for, I think that certainly has
the balance between national interest and the alliance, I think, is the thrust of the question.
I guess I'm not understanding the thrust of the question then. U.S. NATO supreme national interest.
Well, maybe we could rephrase it slightly by coming back to the question of that you outlined, which is there doubt in Japan about whether the United States would be present if Japan faced a challenge from China, particularly in relation to something like the Senkaku Islands? In other words, one of something where one might say national interest would say don't do that, but the alliance commitment would say that there's an obligation there. Is there is that a concern on the part of Japan, whether the United States would be present, Ryo, or is that something that Japan has confidence about?
Okay. Thank you very much for this question. And about Peter's rephrasing question to Senkaku, yes, we don't have, we don't have any, doubts on U.S. commitment to Senkaku. I think, President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden have one similarity. They confirm the commitment to the defense of Senkaku, which is under our control. So, they try to make it clear repeatedly. So we are really sure. And there's no ambiguous points about this commitment. And I think this question may want to say, United States have to be more strategically clear on its commitment towards the defense of Ukraine and towards the defense of Taiwan. And about the Taiwan, I think, even though United States still keep strategic ambiguity to some extent, but China knows very well US would come if they invaded Taiwan. So I think a strategic ambiguity over Taiwan issue is a kind of more diplomatic phrasing. Right? In military sense, China knows a credible signal from United States on the defense of Taiwan. So I'm not worrying about that. But about Ukraine, I personally, as a student, because I'm not a specialist on Ukrainian situation, but as a student, I really want to hear more stronger voice from President Joe Biden towards Ukrainian people and defense of Ukraine. But I also know the difficulty the United States could have. And I don't recommend, don't take me wrong, I don't request US boots on the ground in Ukraine. But, still, I really want Biden encourage more encouraging message he could provide to Ukrainian people.
Recently, the Prime Minister Kishida has made comments in relation to Taiwan that sound like strategic ambiguity in a way. What would Japan do were Taiwan attacked by the People's Republic of China? What do you think the situation is there? You've mentioned the United States. That you're confident that the United States would be involved if there were that kind of an attack. What about Japan? What would Japan's position be?
It is a very difficult question, and actually, because what we should do over Taiwan contingency is first to protect Japanese and international, foreign people over Taiwan Islands. So we really want to evacuate these students from Taiwan Islands. And if we get a request from United States, we will work together. But the Japanese law shall be mainly to the backward their area support to U.S. military operation over Taiwan Strait issue. But at the same time, our SDF will work very hard to defend our national territories, which is really close to Taiwan. We have many islands, southwestern islands, and I'm very sure Japanese SDF will be deployed over these islands in the situation. So that could be a DI backup. That could be supplemental to US operation too.
Yeah, good. Jennifer, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, on the Taiwan issue more broadly, I guess I'll loop it back to the question from Yaguchi-san. So one thing that I think has been a real lesson of the war in Ukraine so far is the suddenly very significant difference between allies and partners. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States sent military forces to Europe to defend NATO, right? So we sent military forces to be there to step up the defense and deterrence of our NATO allies. We're not sending military forces to Ukraine, to a partner who is under attack. So Ukraine would make us look at the situation and say, wow, there is a really big difference between a treaty ally who you are obligated by your law to come to their aid versus a partner who you may be deeply sympathetic to, have many shared values and interests and so on, but you're not legally obliged to defend them if attacked. So on the one hand, there's this sudden, really stark clarity about this distinction between allies and partners. And so you might say that, wow, isn't that going to be very emboldening of China? Like the questioner says, wouldn't that show that there's this red line and it doesn't include Taiwan because it's a partner, not an ally? But I think I would go back to what Ryo was just talking about, which is I think Taiwan's kind of a special case where it's not a treaty ally, but it is a country that used to be an ally, and it's a country that the United States has expressed strong concern about its security and peace in the Taiwan Strait and a peaceful solution to the dispute. And it's a country that basically American leaders have been talking about defending for, what is it now, 40 years. So I think it's in a pretty different situation. We haven't been debating and having people write, highly opinionated op-eds about like, we must come to Ukraine's defense if it's attacked. We haven't had those for the past 40 years. And we have had those with Taiwan. So I'm glad that, so Ryo expressed the view, he thought that people in Japan were confident that the US would protect Taiwan. I don't know if I would have said it as confidently as he did, because I'm watching all of the division that we have here all the time. But I do think that the deterrent against Taiwan is stronger, against the Chinese invasion of Taiwan is actually stronger than, this new distinction between allies and partners might lead us to believe.
Well, it certainly has, I guess, one impact of the invasion of Ukraine is it certainly has made this question that you just addressed much more immediate. What would happen in the case of Taiwan? Because people are drawing the analogy between those two, and that discussion is heating back up again, and I suspect that it will continue that way. We do have one last question, if we can keep you for a minute, and this one is not strategic; it's more domestic politics view. The question is, what is the feeling inside Japan about keeping a prime minister long term after Abe, Prime Minister Abe, who served for 8 years, and then his successor, Prime Minister Suga, was kind of back in 1 year in the 1 year format that preceded Prime Minister Abe. Are we likely to see a new prime minister every year again? Is the question.
Thank you, Ibi-san, for this question. To answer the first part of this question, yes and no. I mean, I don't know there is any feeling that we really want to have a longer tenure for prime minister. But the chance Kishida could survive really depends on whether he can win the upcoming upper house election. Actually, in Constitution, Japanese Constitution say a lower house has some bigger power over budget and other things. But in reality, in last 20 years, we know if the government lost the control of upper house, nothing can be done effectively. So it really depends on this summer's upper house election. But I think, the ruling party coalition might win over upper house election. And if they won, I believe Kishida might survive another year or so. But, nobody knows. So, and I try to be neutral in politics. So this is what I can say.
Sure. So he has an electoral challenge coming up in July, and then we'll see what happens after that. Good. Well, this has been a terrific discussion. Before we invite Mike Turner back, let me just ask our two speakers do you have any final thoughts or any issues that we didn't cover and should have that you might want to comment on?
Well, I'll just say something not really related to geopolitics, but I'll just say again how important this kind of community-based cultural exchange kind of work that your group is doing, how important that is to many people. So I first had experience with Japan because I was in a jazz band in high school, and the jazz band was invited to perform at a World Expo that Japan was hosting one year. And so it was the most amazing thing in the world that I had that opportunity to go to Japan. I'd never been anywhere. And it was an incredible trip. And so again, this was connecting to Japan through this very strange route of being in a band, like through music. And so, I have devoted my entire career to the study of Japan. And the more people that we meet, Sasakawa sponsors a wonderful network that both Sahashi-san and I are members of. And the more people we meet, in the US side, there's always some sort of weird story like that somebody was an exchange student, or they had some strange opportunity like I did. So this is kind of our lifeblood. This is how the alliance continues to be strong. This is how our partnership continues to be strong, is through these kind of odd little exchanges and community building exercises. And so again, I really honor the work that you're doing.
Well, we appreciate that comment, and of course, you're speaking the language of New Orleans when you talk about jazz as a connection.
There you go.
Japan. Ryo, any final words from Tokyo?
Yes. What I want to say is, please come back to Japan. my hawks, right? Now it is second half of March, so some cherry blossom going to in full bloom in a week. You know, it is a really good season. I don't think you can now come to us very speedily, but please come back this year or next year. You know, we really welcome my friends from coming New Orleans. And I really wanted to come back to New Orleans, you know, definitely. I enjoyed my travel to Orleans back to my student year at the Illinois, I believe. But so, you know, the Pacific travel is not so big, you know. Because of the COVID, we somehow feel to go abroad is a really big thing. But actually, you know, it only take 10 hours, you know, to come to the United States or to come to Japan, right? So I really hope we can travel to each other's country very easily, and so we really want to welcome you here.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, thank you for that. And the we also hope that that Japanese will be able to travel to the United States soon without having to quarantine on your return to Japan. It seems like some momentum is picking up at that level, and we hope it continues. Well, we've covered a lot of ground tonight, and we began with Ryo's concept of moving from an age of cooperation into an age of distrust. And I guess it's hard to leave things at an age of distrust, but we live in that age right now, and I think you're laying the groundwork of that, and saying that both the United States and Japan now have to respond within that world of growing distrust. We have to think about how the alliance works in the new context, as unfortunate as it might be. Let's welcome back Mike Turner from the Japan Society of New Orleans. Remember, the Japan Society of New Orleans is an all-volunteer society, and so these are individuals who devote their time to promoting the U.S.-Japan relationship in the New Orleans area. We hope all of you who have joined this program in the New Orleans area have found it informative, and we thank our speakers very much for being willing to join us. We hope next time we'll be in person in New Orleans.
Thank you so much, Peter. You've just watched this program on the Japan Society of New Orleans YouTube channel. Please subscribe for additional events, or if you wish to view this program at a later date. Also, feel free to pass this YouTube channel information on to anyone you think might be interested in this program. I'd like to thank our grantors again, Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA and the National Association of Japan America Societies, for their generous support. Thanks to our moderator and panelists, Mr. Peter Kelley, Dr. Ryo Sahashi, and Dr. Jennifer Lin for a great discussion tonight. Finally, we're always looking for new members to join our ranks. To help support this and other programming from Japan Society of New Orleans, please feel free to join or donate at our website, www.japansocietyofneworleans.org. Many thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. A little housekeeping note, I will ask the speakers to remain online after we're done. Thank you so much. Good night, and a Yasamino Sai.